How did Arthas feel when he betrayed his people during Warcraft 3? What were the exact thoughts going on in his mind when he turned on his own people? When he purged Stratholme, killed his father, and became one of the biggest traitors to his own kind? In this video, we will go over how Arthas felt during the rise of the undead plague in Lordaeron. When news of an unknown plague gripped the Eastern Kingdoms, Arthas was dispatched to investigate its source alongside Captain Falric and Jaina, as well as with a squadron of soldiers. Upon discovering that his people were killed and risen into undeath, Arthas became infuriated, nothing but rage and vengeance consuming his thoughts. Because of this, Arthas pushed his men to the absolute physical maximum, forcing them to ride on horseback for days without rest, only allowing them to rest when Jaina requested for them to stop so that she may have time to eat something. Even then though, he allowed her to eat only 2 bites of cheese before he pressured her into continuing their mission. As this happened, Jaina started to notice that the boy that she knew him to be from when they were young had changed, and she stated to him that he was a paladin of the light, and instead of being consumed by the need for vengeance, he should remember what Uther had taught him. Arthas then responded by saying that he only wanted people to stop dying, his people to stop dying. Upon hearing this, Jaina understood his pain, his anger, and together they rode on. As Arthas and his men continued through the lands, they bore witness to atrocious things. At one point, a man in Hearthglen transformed into an undead in seconds before Arthas's very eyes, blood spilling forth from the man's mouth and eyes, and while he was clinging on to life, he stretched out a hand to Arthas begging for any type of healing whatsoever, anything to help with the pain. All Arthas could do, however, was step back in horror as he witnessed one of his own people transform into an undead abomination. Following this, Arthas traveled to Stratholme, where Uther and Jaina eventually met up with him. Arthas announced to them that Stratholme had already fallen, and that the only thing left for them to do was to purge the entire city before the citizens would become undead. At this, Uther was horrified and even enraged at the thought of such an act. Because the paladin refused to follow Arthas' orders, Arthas stripped him of his rank and then turned to Jaina, expecting her to follow him. But when she refused to aid him in purging the city, Arthas actually could not believe it. He viewed her refusing to aid him as her literally betraying him, abandoning him at the time where he needed her most. This thought would cling to Arthas' memory even after he betrays his people and becomes an agent of undeath. Upon entering the city, Arthas and his men begin murdering the citizens of Stratholme. Men, women, and children who first had happy expressions upon seeing their prince stride into their city, then had that happiness quickly turn to horror and confusion as they realized that these men who once protected them were now killing them. No matter who they were or what age they were, Arthas struck them down. At one point, a boy barely out of puberty asked Arthas why they were dying, but Arthas quickly struck the boy down, only following the act by turning to the boy's mother and killing her as well. With every single death, Arthas' heart sank, and the light that once radiated from his hammer seemingly weakened, as if the light too refused to aid him in this act. Arthas and his men were merciless. They killed those on the streets, those that fought back, and those who fled back into their homes. Arthas lit torches and burned down the buildings, ash flooding his nostrils and the sound of screaming echoing across the lands. Alright, so just for the next few events, I am briefly going to skim over what happens so that the video is not too long, and since there really isn't anything to go over that we don't already know from Warcraft 3. Amidst the purging, Mal'Ganis appears in Stratholme, taunts Arthas, resulting in him traveling to Northrend to hunt Mal'Ganis down, and surprisingly and unexpectedly meeting up with Muradin. As time goes on, Arthas, Muradin, and their men are assaulted by undead to the point of where they are literally overwhelmed, with the only way that they can survive being if Arthas retrieved Frostmourne and returned to his outpost where he would slay the legions of undead with the legendary blade. Upon discovering Frostmourne and shattering it from its bonds, however, a shard of ice impaled Muradin, knocking him unconscious and making his body go limp. Upon seeing this, Arthas rushed to his old friend, and he began to tear up. He not only asked but begged the light to grant him the ability to aid his friend. He prayed, "It is my folly, my price. Please, please," but before he could continue, the icy whisper of Frostmourne called to him. The light which answered his prayers immediately vanished, and Arthas walked to the blade, grabbed hold of it, and became the very thing he sought to protect his people from. Once again, there isn't much to say about the following events, so I'm going to skim over them. Arthas comes back to the outpost, kills the undead, kills Mal'Ganis, ventures out into Northrend with nothing but Frostmourne whispering to him. After a few months later, he returns to Lordaeron, but despite all he has become, all he has done, Arthas catches a rose petal, playing with it in his hand, while he thinks of what could have been if the undead threat had never arisen. He had always wanted to marry Jaina, to have the two bathed in rose petals such as the one he held in his hand right now when they were declared husband and wife. But before he could dream any further, a brown spot appeared where he had touched it. The rose petal was dying. Brought back to his sense of reality, he threw the petal away, entering his father's throne room, unsheathed Frostmourne, and held it up ready to kill his father. But just at that moment, he heard a voice. A voice years ago from Varian echoed in his head. What happened to your father? He was assassinated. A trusted friend killed him, stabbed him, right in the heart. Arthas stood, hypnotized for a moment, but then shook the thought from his mind and drove the blade through his father, bringing about the fall of Lordaeron. Arthas then sprinted to the gravesite of his beloved horse Invincible, while Falric and Marwyn were busy killing the citizens in Lordaeron and raising them into undeath. As Arthas ran, voices echoed in his head. The shadow has already fallen, and nothing you will do will deter it. The more you strive to slay your enemies, the faster you will deliver your people into their hands. We know so little. We can't slaughter them like animals out of our own fear. This is not a blighted apple crop. This is a city full of human beings. You lied to your men and betrayed the mercenaries who fought for you. What's happening to you, Arthas? Arthas, pained at hearing the voices, nevertheless didn't stop until he reached his location. With his new abilities, he raised Invincible into undeath, and for the first time since the discovery of the undead plague, Arthas felt right. He felt happy. Time goes on and Arthas confronts Uther after Taranis' funeral in order to retrieve the magical urn that was currently holding his father's ashes. The two of them exchange insults. I answered to the light, boy. You once did too. As Uther had said this, Arthas faltered. The light. He remembered it. He remembered its warmth, its protecting aura, and for a moment, just for a moment, there was silence. And Arthas lowered his weapon. However, the voices of Frostmourne once more whispered to him, reminding him of how powerful he now was. Arthas then raised his weapon, ready to kill Uther, anger fueling him. There was no way Uther would be spared, not if he begged, especially not if he begged. There was too much history between both he and his teacher, and it was for that very reason that Arthas could not let him walk away. Uther then looked at Arthas, with tears in his eyes. I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad he isn't here to see what you've become. Arthas hesitated. Despite being an agent of undeath, Uther's words had hurt him, causing his emotions to war with each other. But in that moment of pause, Uther charged. The two clashed blades, Uther barely missing devastating blows on Arthas numerous times, while Arthas was being pushed back. It was all he could do to stay alive. Uther had fought with a deadly calm. His face reflected complete confidence to his inevitable victory, and the light radiated from him, not only nearly blinding Arthas, but fueling Uther and giving him unmatched strength. Uther landed a blow on Arthas, knocking him off of his feet. At this moment, Arthas lost hope. He realized that the light was exacting retribution through Uther the Lightbringer, and he realized that even after all he had become, he was still not strong enough to best Uther. However, as the killing blow was about to be dealt, Frostmourne whispered to Arthas, causing him to evade the blow, pick up Frostmourne, counter Uther's attacks, landing blow after blow against Uther, until finally Uther could hold his ground no further, and fell before the Death Knight. The rune blade descended down into the paladin's throat. Stone-faced, Arthas picked up the urn, emptied out Taranis' ashes, and made way to Quel'thalas. Upon reaching the Elven lands, he was met by a ranger general by the name of Sylvanas. Sylvanas, although she had thought of ambushing Arthas and the undead army, decided against it, for she refused to attack an enemy without fair warning. However, this would prove to be a huge mistake as Arthas was not bound to the same honor code. He and his undead army ravaged her troops, raising them into undeath and even hurling mutilated corpses and limbs back at the Night Elven troops. Whereas before, Arthas was somewhat hesitant to kill his father or engage Uther in combat. He had no trouble slaughtering the Elven soldiers. He even enjoyed it. constantly making eye contact with Sylvanas and smiling at her after one of her lieutenants had fallen or if he managed to push her troops back. In time, this sense of pleasure and amusement quickly faded when Sylvanas finally managed to buy her people some time by blowing up a bridge that Arthas and his army was trying to cross. This was when his amusement with Sylvanas turned to anger. Time passes and Sylvanas and her archers make one final stand at Fairbreeze village. Inevitably, the undead overwhelmed them, the slaughter only stopping after Sylvanas is the final survivor. With a sob that was not of fear or sadness, but rather anger that she was powerless to do anything more, she charged at Arthas, who struck her down with Frostmourne. As she lay there bleeding, she thought she saw a hint of regret and even sadness on Arthas' face. But this thought quickly disappeared from her mind when Arthas raised her into undeath. Agony like she had never experienced coursed through her spirit until she was finally risen as a banshee. Despite previously insulting her each time by smiling at her through the mist of battle, Arthas now looked at her with a grim expression, and with genuine regret in his voice, he said, "Know that it did not have to be this way. Your fate, and that of your people, rests upon your choices." Arthas and his army continue to advance on the Elven lands until he is met in combat with Anastarian Sunstrider, the father to Prince Quel'thalas. In the fight, Anastarian manages to evade Arthas' blows and even sever Invincible's forelegs with fellow Malorn. Seeing this, Arthas cries out in such pain, sadness, and rage at the injury his mount has suffered that Sylvanas actually said that for once, he looked human. He looked alive. With one swing, Frostmourne broke fellow Malorn, cutting into Anastarian, killing him. Forced to do nothing but bear witness to this, Sylvanas let out a cry of anger, horror, frustration, and hatred. A cry so loud and so piercing that it broke the armor of the remaining Elven defenders. It rendered them incapable of defending themselves as they were deafened, and it brought them onto their knees as blood began to rush out from their ears. With the Elven defenders distracted, the undead army easily dispatched the remaining now wounded elves as Sylvanas watched in horror. Arthas then turned to her, smiled and said, "What a fine weapon you are indeed." Alright guys, and that's where this video ends, because after this, aside from returning back to Northrend and fighting off Quel'thalas and Illidan, Arthas doesn't really personally purge any more of the living from his land. He already took down Lordaeron and Quel'thalas, and that's pretty much it. Hopefully though, you found this video interesting. Hopefully this video allowed you some insight on the warring mind of Arthas Menethil, how the main part of him cared not for the murder of his own people and the Elven people, but how the small piece of him that remains from when he was still human, when he was still a paladin, hesitates when striking down family and loved ones, and even regrets murdering Sylvanas. Many times he cursed himself for abandoning the light, but every time the light opens its arms to welcome him back in, Frostmourne whispers to him and pulls him further away. But that's it to the video guys, I hope you all enjoyed, and until next time, I'll see ya.